Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, as part of our tribute to Zeitgeist Films, a woman-owned distribution company, we're presenting Margaret von Trotta's Hannah Arendt. This is a biopic that portrays the great German Jewish intellectual Hannah Arendt and the controversy caused by her reporting on the trial of notorious Nazi Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. After today's film, we'll be chatting about the moral issues, the aesthetic issues, and more in this film. It's a pleasure to have back on City Cinematheque Phillip Lopate, the noted novelist, essayist, and film critic. Now, dive into the world of Hannah Arendt. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed what I think is a privilege to see a film of quality like this, Margaret von Trotta's Hannah Arendt, that's full of great performance and all kinds of great artistic decisions, as well as moral debate, genuine moral debate. To talk about that and much more, it's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque our good friend, Phillip Lopate. Many people know Phillip as a novelist, as a widely published essayist, and also as a film critic. He's got two books coming out in the near future, one of his essays, A Year and a Day, and another whose title I love, My Affair with Art House Cinema, which is a collection of not all, but of some of his writing on art house cinema. Welcome back, Phillip.
Pleasure to be here.
Great. So you're somebody who has been tracking, as it were, Margaret von Trotta and the new German cinema, as it's been called, for decades. So it's a way of saying it's not that new. So put her and this film kind of initially in that context, if you might.
Well, von Trotta was a member of the new German cinema, along with Fassbinder, Werner Herzog, Wim Wenders, and Volker Schlöndorff, to whom she was actually married for about 20 years. And at the beginning, she started out as an actress, and then she began making movies with her husband, Volker Schlöndorff. And after a few of them, they were very successful, but she wanted to establish her own artistic voice, and so she began to work alone and to write and to direct these films. And her body of work was very involved with women.
Right.
And she became known as the most foremost feminist filmmaker in the world. Very involved with, let's say, relationships between women, women bonding with each other. So, you know, she made a movie called Rosa Luxemburg about the revolutionary, a movie called Vision about Hildegard von Bingen, the nun, and Marianne and Julianne, two sisters. So there was a whole background for her making movies about women who had to fight against a lot of barriers in order to establish their individual presence. So in a way, Hannah Arendt was just another one of these, though it was very different.
Okay, what are the different challenges here?
I think a lot of her previous films had a melodramatic quality. And here she was dealing with a woman, with a historical figure who was anti-melodramatic, you know? And throughout the film, the men keep saying, oh, you know, Hannah, all mind and no heart. So this is the accusation. So it's interesting that she's working with a protagonist who has a kind of dislike of melodrama. And part of Hannah Arendt's whole rebellion, you might say, against the conventional response to the Shoah was that there was something kitschy about it or sentimental about it. And also that there was something polarized about it. There were the good people and the bad people. And the whole movie begins with her sort of talking to her friend, Mary McCarthy, and saying, you know, men are complicated, you know, they're neither one thing nor the other. So that prepares us for seeing that she had a kind of subtle or nuanced view of humanity, and she was not going to go along with this Manichaean view that there are the good people and the bad people.
Right. And let's also talk about just the simple fact that you're choosing, one, an intellectual. It's not like you're choosing a female protagonist,
Yes.
okay? But she's not an action hero. This is not Aliens.
Right.
She's not killing people in outer space. And her profession is philosophy professor. And the real subject in certain way here, I mean, it's broader than that, is what constitutes thinking and thinking inside human, but that's a big dramaturgical problem.
And not just thinking, but writing. You know, the history of movies about writers is basically a disaster.
Okay.
Again and again, filmmakers have tried to show, to try to cinematize the act of writing.
Right.
Like, Lillian Hellman tossing the typewriter out the window, crumpling up paper, all of this stuff. There's none of that in this movie, Hannah Arendt. We never see her struggling with writing. She's just typing away, So there's no attempt to activate the act of writing.
Right.
We just have to assume that she knows what she's doing and she's going to do it, So there's none of that nonsense,
Right.
So really it's about the ideas and the presence of the ideas in the public realm that is going to be the drama, the tension. But I just want to backtrack a little and say that, part of the ways that Hannah Arendt is shown to have a feeling life is at the beginning with her conversations with Mary McCarthy, who's the one character in the movie who does not question her, simply loves her as a friend.
Right, absolutely.
And then there's her husband, and we see a lot of quasi-erotic activity between Hannah and her husband. She obviously loves this guy. He's a hunk, you know. He's a big guy, and he's very masculine, And she loves him. She adores him. So we think, okay, she does have feeling,
Right.
She
What,
loves
you're
her
going to
husband.
leave with no kisses and hugs?
What?
He's leaving, and she comes. She says,
Yes.
"No kisses and hugs.
yeah.
Hugs.
Yes,
Before you get."
Exactly. And of course, when he falls down, she becomes very protective, So it's a funny kind of relationship because she's obviously the star in the world, and he's never done anything that could attract the same kind of attention, and yet she defers to him in a certain way, So there's that feeling, and then there's a feeling for her friends who basically, the one friend in Jerusalem who
Of course, yeah.
who turns away from her when he's dying, and Hans who also says you've gone too far,
Right.
And then there's this very complicated relationship that she had with Heidegger. She was a lover of Heidegger, and Heidegger ended up, being a Nazi.
Right.
And so this is something that the movie deals with. If there's any guilt on her part, it has to do with her relationship with Heidegger.
Right. And we see that there's also this conflict between the fact that she doesn't want to reveal her private life
Right.
as part of the public story that she's involved in. But one of the things the film wants to do is to show how she protects that.
Yes.
And how she wishes to negotiate that with her friends, which is her most cherished relationships, on this one-to-one basis. And she makes this distinction between the forum of public thinking
Right.
and how you deal with your friends, how you take judgment into consideration with your friends, and as you pointing out, there's a complete change in body language.
Yes.
As well, which is also part of the brilliance of Barbara Sokova's performance.
Yeah, and Barbara Sokova worked with von Trotta in 6 movies. Barbara Sokova had started out in Fassbinder films like Berlin Alexanderplatz and Lola. She was a beauty,
Right.
So the fact that in this particular film, there's no attempt to glamorize.
Absolutely.
Barbara Sokova is not working with her potential to be this beautiful actress, There's something very kind of rigid about her in a way.
Absolutely.
About her Hannah,
And we also see it is a it is a way in which there's a film that tries to, and I think it succeeds, to show that you can actually watch her thinking in a certain kind of way
Right.
through the very particular body language she has. And that body language changes across the film in terms of what situation she's in, whether she's confronting people publicly as the journalist or as the professor, or whether she's leaning over her dying friend's bedside.
When Hans, after her lecture, continues to castigate her, and she says, "No, no, don't do this." She can't seem to navigate the idea that when she's talking to a friend, there's still friendship that's most important, you know, and that's a private thing. She doesn't realize that they cannot distinguish between her public position vis-a-vis the Jews and her friendship, you know. She wants to just say, "We're friends. Let's not do that," you know. And she's very clear that what she cares about is friendship and love.
Right.
And she says, you know, I don't love a people. She doesn't have a tribal feeling.
Right, absolutely.
And that's part of what she's being condemned for, that she doesn't.
She can't make that alliance. She can only make, she makes the claims, my only alliance, my only important relations are with friends. And of course, a number of voices surrounding her are saying, no, there are other responsibilities, and you can't reject all other tribes. Which brings us, you know, around to two questions. I mean, one is the incidents portrayed in this film, but also the fact that this film concentrates on her investigation of the Eichmann case and her writing of that book. So that's itself a decision about a biopic.
Right.
You know, is that you're not going to
do the whole life. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only flashback had to do with her relationship with Martin Heidegger. You know.
Right.
But essentially, it's all about Eichmann in Jerusalem. And I remember when Eichmann in Jerusalem came out, I read it and I liked it very much as a very lively piece of writing.
Right.
And as a fellow writer, I sympathized with her desire to find something new or provocative that nobody else was saying.
Right.
You know, even though in retrospect, I came to disagree with some of her conclusions. As an act of writing, I thought it was terrific. But, you know, some of her conclusions I thought were wrong.
Well, let me just, before we go over to some of the moral questions and the historical questions that the film really treats with subtlety and intelligence, I'd like to just bring up the question or the issue that this is a multilingual film.
Yeah.
And all that, this part of what is a immigrant intellectual's responsibility towards both their mother tongue and what they can negotiate in that, and also, in a certain sense, their adopted country or their adopted culture and their need to communicate their experience in that. And you don't have so many films that, in a certain sense, thematicize that issue. And it's interesting that you were talking about a relationship with Mary McCarthy, because exactly that degree to which certain debates seem to happen best in their native language among them because of its expressive quality, but that means excluding people who are very sympathetic to the debate itself.
I'd like to make an historical point, which is that in the post-war period, you know, you had this phenomenon called the New York intellectuals.
Yeah.
And a lot of the movie is really about a kind of a social scene of the New York intellectuals.
Correct.
And the New York, the post-war period was infused with European immigrants, you know, who brought a kind of level of sophistication and intellectual power to the New York scene. So suddenly, you know, everybody was writing essays, and they were trying to sound like Hannah Arendt, you know, or Nicola Chiaramonte, or any of these figures who had settled in New York, you know.
Right.
And so a lot of the film is about this kind of a moment when New York became a kind of global intellectual center, you know.
I have to tell just a very brief anecdote about that. About 20 years ago, the now late Argentine filmmaker Fernando Berri was here in a writer's residence for a while. I was taking him to a launch of a literary magazine that was happening in someone's townhouse. And Fernando said to me, but I speak Spanish. He'd lived for many years in Rome. I speak Italian. And I said, there's no problem.
Right.
You have no idea how many Italophiles
Right.
will be here. You will just immediately doing that. And he kind of came away. He said, wow, that was really true.
Right.
I had no problem. Yeah.
There's something awkward in any kind of biopic when you're dealing with known figures, you know, like in the Jackson Pollock film, somebody saying, well, Willem, and then we know it's de Kooning, you know. So that happens a little bit in that scene with Norman and I forgot who else. Lionel,
Right.
yes. And it turns out it's Lionel Edel. I'm sorry,
Lionel Trilling?
Abel.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and Norman Podhoretz, you
Right,
know.
right.
So we know that this is basically a kind of social scene, and a lot of the movie is in interiors, you know.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So this is also about a kind of world, you know, and it's that world of the New York intellectuals. And she was riding very high in that world because she was so respected because of her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
We should point out in here that she was writing at this point in her life directly in English, having lived here for many years. And even though the William Shawn character makes, okay, so we got to do the tweak here or there, nonetheless, she's a powerful intellectual presence in what is her third or fourth language.
Yes, an extraordinary prose writer, actually.
Yeah.
She was, and she wrote a book called Men in Dark Times. And again in this movie, there's a reference to dark times because that was her expression for the Holocaust. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the Eichmann trial and the importance of this as a choice. Now you remember the controversy from its very time. So put this film in the context of the controversy and the fact that it's an ongoing controversy.
There were two problems that her book raised. One was her attempt to portray Eichmann as a kind of nobody, a nonentity who was just carrying on orders, you know. And actually, since that book was written, a lot more evidence has come to pass that Eichmann was not such a nobody. He had a lot more blood on his hands, you know, but she had accepted his kind of gray nonentity self-definition.
His performance, in essence.
Yes, his performance of nonentityness.
Yes.
Yeah. And the second thing was that she says that the Jewish elders had collaborated with the Nazis, and that had they not collaborated with the Nazis, it would have saved a lot of Jewish lives. Now, when she's challenged on that, she says, well, it was in the trial, and so I was just stating a fact. But in fact, she wasn't just stating a fact. She was making a judgment based on that evidence that had come out in the trial, which was, that it was much more, that the Jewish elders had a lot more to answer for in terms of the death of Jews, you know. And that's something that, you know, we could argue back and forth, but basically, I don't think she was right about that. But I like the fact that she introduced it as something people could think about.
Well, you know, one of the things, aside from giving a social portrait of this world of New York intellectuals, this is a film in which there are just many voices. While the film is called Hannah Arendt,
Yes.
there are one of the structures of the film is the people, enemies and friends, which is very, very important, and people who slip from one category to the other who are challenging her. And
Right.
she must engage in thinking and debate with them, and not always, and this is, I think, one of the virtues of the film, not always successfully.
Yes, in fact, one of the things that I like the most in this film is that some of the criticisms that she faces stick. Like one of the criticisms is that she's a snob, basically. She doesn't want to, basically associate with all the Jewish nonentities,
Right.
or the ones who feel very sentimental about the 6 million who were killed, you know?
Right.
That's kitsch. And in a way, it's a little bit like Susan Sontag writing after 9/11, that piece that some people felt was tone deaf, but she, you know, Sontag did not want to participate in this orgy of self-pity, you know, and sentimentality that occurred after, and patriotism, essentially. So, you know, there's a way in which, yes, she was a snob.
No. And this is a film that tells the historical truth of the fact that the position she took and the way she took the position meant that thoughtful, long-term friends also said, no, this really becomes the end of our relationship. It does not. There are not last-minute, conversions. There are people who are portrayed as being as equally capable of thinking in that all-important phrase of this, but who are capable not just of another angle, but perhaps combining another's aspect of human experience with the thinking, whereas part of her claim is she can isolate that.
She wanted to believe in this this idea that intellectuals could fight it out and then have a wonderful dinner afterwards, Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a nice fantasy, that people can just battle out their ideas, and then hug and kiss each other afterwards. But this was a little bit too hot.
Right. Well, to bring up the history of philosophy, she comes off as one of the last absolutist defenders of Enlightenment thought about how rationality, if we just get enough rationality out there, we can correct all of these things and get everybody on the right path. But of course, as you point out, part of her snobbery or arrogance doesn't want certain people to be on that path, because she's not so clear that everybody will be capable. Because thinking is a higher activity.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I do feel that von Trotta is definitely on Hannah Arendt's side.
Correct. Yeah.
And wants to show how a woman who was facing a lot of opposition stuck to her guns,
Yeah, absolutely.
But usually she had done this in the past by showing women being very emotional, Right. And this time, women are often accused of being hysterical, overly emotional. This time she's working with a woman who's being critiqued for being not emotional enough.
Right. No, and of course, it's always described as melodrama, the women's genre.
The women's film.
Yeah, absolutely the fact. And so now she has. This is non-melodramatic in two ways.
You have to think. You have to think through it.
Absolutely. And our protagonist is absolutely opposed to melodramatic performance,
right.
Although she believes the performance of thinking, if people listen and understand it, is something. But melodrama and kitsch, she's absolutely against. But also at that other level of von Trotta is not interested in making a melodramatic film. Right. She's interested in making a film that actually shows people in thoughtful and vigorous debate,
yes.
And sincere debate about issues of importance.
And of course, it's Barbara Sokoa's performance. I mean, the whole film really is so dependent on Barbara Sokoa and Barbara Sokoa herself was an immigrant who basically lives in Brooklyn, so she's somebody also who came to America, to New York specifically,
right. To
live in this cultural life, you might say.
And by the way, one of the things that's interesting, since I did a little bit of reading about the production history itself, is that Barbara Sokoa has been in the United States so long that she had to work on her German accent for the film, so she would get that right tone of someone who had arrived at a particular moment and was acquiring American English from a particular class of people. So that's another. It's another tribute to Barbara Sokoa and the brilliance of the performance.
Barbara Sokoa, the way she moves from unbending to bending, and vice versa, and that's your comment about the body language, and how she stands at an angle to people.
Right.
She really embodies so much of the stance, the intellectual stance of Hannah Arendt.
Here's one other point I think we should address, and that's the interpolation of the actual trial materials into the film. Why do you think that was important for von Trotta?
That we actually can see Eichmann.
Yeah.
nobody's going to play Eichmann, you know. I could just see actors saying, please, no.
I'm changing agents right now, right?
Yeah, it's a risky business whenever you include documentary film. But I think there was something so so unique in Eichmann's actual performance, or self-performance, you might say, that that nobody could duplicate it. His boredom, you might say. There he is. He's defending his life, and he's bored with these people talking about, Auschwitz and the concentration camps. Like, yeah, I heard it. Been there, done that.
The other thing is that it gives us a chance to watch Hannah Arendt thinking about him.
Yeah.
Because what von Trotta does cinematically is she's got that footage, and then she puts us in the position of Hannah Arendt as a spectator.
Right.
And so we see the fact that she's thinking this through, and how the reaction shots of her are as important as the shots of him, because then when she starts actually formulating and announcing her ideas, we can see how she's taken in that information and begun to process it.
And the most famous of those ideas is what you call the banality of evil,
Right.
So in a way, you could say that her conclusion, the banality of evil, had to do with her not accepting the sensationalism of evil.
Right, yeah.
Once again, it comes from her need to reject melodrama, you might say.
Well, and her observation that she thought the trial, that she was discovering the banality inside something that she was actually accusing of being a melodramatic show trial.
Right.
Right. No. I think that's an excellent point.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay. It's always a pleasure to recognize your excellent points. And in doing so, we're going to actually have to conclude this discussion. We're not a bad place, I think, to do that. So, if you've enjoyed our discussion today and would like to consider other films, please tune in again to City Cinematheque. How do you know what we're doing? It's easy to find out. You can visit our website, www.tv.cuny.edu. There you're going to find the schedule for City Cinematheque, you're going to find ways to communicate with us, and you're going to find all of the programming of CUNY TV itself. And don't forget that we're running YouTube channels now, and so many of our programs can be seen streaming at any point. How do you find out about that? Go to CUNY TV's website, www.tv.cuny.edu. Philip, always a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Bringing a lot of expertise, buddy. and I look forward to our discussions in the future.
Me too.
Great. And I look forward to your coming back to our discussions in the future as we continue our stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye. Thanks.